Good morning, students. In today's class we will be learning about types of reinforcement. So let us start with the class. So in yesterday's class we have learned about positive and negative reinforcement. So reinforcement can be positive or negative. So positive reinforcements, they strengthen and maintain the responses that have caused them to occur. So positive reinforcers satisfy needs which include food, water, medals, praise, money, status, information, etc. While on the other hand, negative reinforcers involve unpleasant and painful stimuli, responses that lead organisms to get rid of painful stimuli or avoid an escape from them provide negative reinforcement. So now I already gave you examples in your previous class. Suppose a child scores very well in the examination and his or her parents decide him or her to offer some sweets or praises or some other kinds of gifts. So what will happen, the possibility of that particular behavior, as in the possibility of scoring well in the examination, that particular behavior occurrence will tend to increase. Okay, the child will try to get more marks in the next examination because that child has been provided with positive reinforcement. While on the other hand, if in a classroom a child is making a lot of noise and the teacher decides to make the child not sit with his friends but somewhere else, so that will be unpleasant for him, painful for the child. So the child from the next time will try not to disturb the class, not to talk in the class, to avoid that particular situation. But then again, we have to understand that there is a difference between punishment and negative reinforcement. So use of punishment reduces or suppresses the response, while a negative reinforcer increases the probability of avoidance or escape response. So punishment suppresses the particular response, but a reinforcer increases the probability of avoidance or escape response. So in this particular case, if we take the case of a child disturbing the class and the teacher asks the child to go and sit in a place where his friends are not there, then it will act as a negative reinforcer. So from next time the child may avoid shouting in the classroom or disturbing the classroom, but instead of that, if the teacher slaps the child, insults the child, that will act as a punishment, and that is going to suppress the child. That is actually not really going to work. That is going to suppress the child and not exactly help the child to get rid of that particular behavior. So we have to always remember that it should be understood that no punishment suppresses a response permanently. We have to remember that mild and delayed punishment has no effect. The stronger the punishment, the more lasting is the suppression effect, but it is not permanent. So suppression is not permanent. You cannot get rid of that particular behavior. It will just get suppressed, but it is not going to get ridden off. Okay, but negative reinforcement acts in better ways. Negative reinforcement will actually make that behavior go away. Okay, so sometimes punishment has no effect irrespective of its intensity. On the contrary, the punished person may develop dislike and hatred for the punishing agent or the person who administers the punishment. So sometimes punishment is not even going to work. Rather than that, the child may start hating the teacher and will repeat the same thing next day. So because he or she will not know that he was he or she was wrong in some ways. Okay, so that's why punishment doesn't work in most cases. Okay, so if you have seen that people who commit crimes, they keep committing crimes, they have been punished and they keep committing crimes. It happens because punishment doesn't work permanently. It's not a permanent solution. You cannot suppress someone for his or her whole life. So that's why negative reinforcement works better. So now let us talk about other kinds of reinforcement in our next slide. So number of reinforcement and other features. It refers to the number of trials on which an organism has been reinforced or rewarded. Amount of reinforcement means how much of reinforcing stimulus, that is food or water, or intensity of pain causing agent one receives on each trial. Quality of reinforcement refers to the kind of reinforcer. So first, suppose let us take the same example here. A child scores well in his examination, and he has been rewarded with sweets, chocolates, praises, and the next time he again scores well in his examination. Next time he doesn't get anything. He doesn't get praises or any kind of sweets, chocolates, nothing. Then again he scores well in his or her his examination, and again he doesn't get any kinds of rewards. Then you will see that the child is not trying to score well in his examination later on, because the amount of reinforcement, the number of reinforcement has been reduced. Okay, so the child will slowly show that the behavior of scoring well in the examination has been diminishing. Okay, then quality of reinforcement refers to the kind of reinforcers. Chickpeas or pieces of bread are of inferior quality as compared with raisins or pieces of cake as reinforcer. So now if you want to encourage someone, motivate someone, or if you think about the experiment also, if suppose you do well in your examination, and then your mother cooks really delicious food for you, or you are provided with chickpeas or pieces of bread as a reward, then is it going to work if you are provided a piece of bread or chickpeas? But if you do well, or you scored well and all your favorite things have been made, then definitely you will get encouraged. This will act as a better reinforcement. Okay, so things like chickpeas or pieces of bread, all these are of inferior quality reinforcement. Okay, and but cake or pieces of raisins, these are superior quality reinforcers. Okay, so now imagine in your birthday, if let us not take the example of birthday, but suppose you have done something really well in your school, and then your parents get a cake to celebrate with you. That will definitely act as a reinforcement rather than them providing you a piece of bread, right? So yes, there are superior and inferiority quality reinforcers, and of course how many times you have been reinforced, that also matters. Okay, so the course of operant conditioning is usually accelerated to an extent as the number, amount, and quality of reinforcement increases. So the better the quality is, the more the number of reinforcement you get, the more conditioned you get. Okay, now let us talk about schedules of reinforcement. So a reinforcement schedule is the arrangement of the delivery of reinforcement during conditioning trials. Each schedule of reinforcement influences the course of conditioning in its own way, and thus conditioned responses occur with differential characteristics. The organism being subjected to operant conditioning may be given reinforcement in every acquisition trial or in some trials. Now you think about that rat experiment again. Okay, so what can happen, be like in an experiment where we are trying to establish operant conditioning, there can be schedules. Okay, so the organism being subjected to operant conditioning, we are uh, doing that experiment on that particular organism. That organism may be given reinforcement in every acquisition trial, or in some trials it is given and in others it is omitted. Now if you take the example of that red experiment, so suppose there are 10 number of trials. So out of those 10 number of trials, in 10 number of trials only, uh, uh, the reinforcement as in the food can be given, or what can be done is that in 5 number of trials the food is given, that is the reinforcement, and the other 5 number of times the food is not given. So we can do these two kinds of reinforcement when it comes to operant conditioning in an experiment. So thus the reinforcement may be continuous or intermittent. Okay, so out of 10 number of trials, if 10 times the food has been presented, then we will say that it is continuous reinforcement. But if there are 10 number of trials and only 6 times the food has been presented, other 4 times it has not been presented, then we will call it partial reinforcement. Okay, so what happens is that in continuous reinforcement there is a higher possibility that the organism will get conditioned. Okay, but when it comes to partial reinforcement, that it 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 can go into extinction. Okay, it has been found to produce greater resistance to extinction that is found with continuous reinforcement. Now let us talk about delayed reinforcement. So the effectiveness of reinforcement is dramatically altered by delay in the occurrence of reinforcement. It is found that delay in the delivery of reinforcement leads to poorer level of performance. So now if you see that suppose there is a competition in school. Okay, so there is a running competition in school. A child wins the race, and the child she gets some kind of reward for winning the race, and it happens immediately. Okay, like it has been announced that she won the race, and the next day she gets her reward. It's something small only, like say maybe a box of chocolates. But instead of that, if the child has been rewarded something bigger, okay, something bigger after 6 months or 7 months, so what will happen is that will lead to poorer level of performance. No matter what kind of reinforcement you are giving, if there is a delay, then that will not lead to conditioning. Okay, so every time a child is winning a race, you are rewarding the child with something or the other, so that will act as a conditioning agent. But if you are delaying the reward, okay, delaying the reinforcement after 6-7 months, maybe something better has been rewarded, okay, probably some kind of medal or something bigger and better. But the thing is that since it is very delayed, so that will not lead to conditioning and it will lead to poorer level of performance, okay. So now let us look at box 6.1, difference between classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So in classical conditioning, uh, uh, if you see, okay, the responses are under the control of some stimulus because they are reflexes automatically elicited by appropriate stimuli. So if you remember in that dog experiment, it was the saliva, the secretion of saliva. So whenever you are presented with food or you get the smell of the food, then you salivate, and it is an automatic response. So it is a reflex action, okay. It's you are not salivating like I want to salivate, so I am salivating. So such stimuli are selected as unconditioned stimulus and responses elicited by them as unconditioned response, okay. So it was an unconditioned stimulus and the responses which are elicited by them are known as your unconditioned response. So in Pavlovian conditioning, that is classical conditioning, in which unconditioned stimulus elicits responses, is often called responded conditioning also. But in instrumental conditioning, responses are under the control of the organism and are voluntary responses or operants. Thus, in two forms of conditioning, different types of responses are conditioned. So, if you now take the example of the rat, so the rat was showing exploratory behavior, and then accidentally the rat pressed the lever and the food was being presented. So the next time the rat was not taking time to press the lever, so the food will be presented to the rat. So here the response is voluntary, okay, unlike the salivation of salivation by the dog, okay. Here the rat is pressing the lever on its own, okay, so it is voluntary, okay. So and then again in classical conditioning, the conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus are well defined, but in operant conditioning, conditioned stimulus is not well defined. It can be inferred but not directly known. That's why we didn't study about conditioned stimulus in operant conditioning. Then third number is, in classical conditioning, the experimenter controls the occurrence of the unconditioned stimulus, while in operant conditioning, the occurrence of the reinforcer is under the control of the organism that is learning. So again in the second experiment, in operant conditioning experiment, the rat would press the lever and the food will be presented to the rat. So it is under the control of the rat, okay. But in classical conditioning, the experimenter had the full control, okay. The dog didn't have any control. So thus for unconditioned stimulus in classical conditioning, the organism remains passive, while in operant conditioning, the subject has to be active in order to be reinforced. So we have to play a role when it comes to operant conditioning. It doesn't just happen, okay. So we have to do something, then only operant conditioning happens. So in the two forms of conditioning, the technical terms used to characterize the experimental proceedings are different. Moreover, what is called reinforcer in operant conditioning is called unconditioned stimulus in classical conditioning, and US has two functions. So always remember that the reinforcer in operant conditioning is called unconditional stimulus in classical conditioning. Okay, and an unconditional stimulus has two functions. In the beginning, it elicits the response and also reinforces the response to be associated and elicited later on by the conditioned stimulus. Okay, so these are the basic differences between classical and operant conditioning. If possible, I will provide you more materials to understand the difference between classical and operant conditioning, but I'm sure so far you have already understood what classical conditioning is and what is operant conditioning, and also the differences between them. So that's all for today's class. If you have any doubt or any queries, please feel free to ask. Thank you.